Yes, it's not the first time Kramatorsk has been hit. There was an absolutely horrific strike on Kramatorsk that you might recall from last year on the train station. And I think this may be the Russian military leadership very keen to show that the insurrection over the weekend and the intrigues occurring amongst their generals and their defense minister will not cause them to pause the campaign. And of course, on top of that, we have also seen Ukraine's army take advantage of the chaos to some degree. They've made advances around the city of Bakhmut in the east, where they are threatening to encircle the Russian forces that took the city last month. And we've also seen some rather small scale, perhaps opportunistic, but nonetheless very interesting crossings of the Dnipro River in the area near where the Kakhovka Dam was blown up last month. And so again, I think the Russians feel perhaps on the back foot here.
Yeah. And, while we're looking at these renewed missile attacks, it does continue to expose Ukraine's vulnerability. They are, in many cities, managing to counter these missile attacks, but they are exposed in other parts of the country.
They are. They have a limited number of air defense systems. And of course, you have to choose how you allocate those systems between a number of priorities. And they have to choose between defending the capital city, Kiev, defending other population centers, defending military bases and things like ammunition depots, which are, of course, very important during an offensive, and finally, defending the frontline troops who are conducting attacks, often pushing forward beyond the range of their air defense systems at the front. And of course, Ukraine has an increasing amount of air defense. We're seeing new commitments coming in, particularly by the Germans, who are offering new Gepard short-range air defense systems, which is great. But of course, there's only a limited number. The front lines are 1,200 kilometers long, and Ukraine is an enormous country. So these systems cannot protect everywhere at once.
Yeah. Shashank, as you've been digesting the weekend's events, and of course every day we hear more and more snippets, as you pointed out, maybe that the Russian top brass might have been aware of Prigozhin's plans. What are you making of it? How do you look at it as to what really was happening?
Well, I've got to confess, humility. I don't know what happened. I don't think anyone does. Even the officials we're talking to here, I think, don't have the full picture at this stage. But what really struck me, Bev, from the weekend was watching that conversation, which some of you may have seen, between Prigozhin in his little mutinous camp in Rostov and General Alexeyev, who's the deputy head of Russian military intelligence, the GRU. And we saw them joking, Prigozhin saying, can I have Sergei Shoigu and Valery Gerasimov, the defense minister and the chief of general staff? Are you going to hand them over? And Alexeyev said, oh, you can take them, which is a pretty punchy thing for a general to joke about a warlord capturing and abducting his defense minister and his chief of general staff. And I think that is emblematic of the divisions being laid bare here. Of course, the latest story you alluded to is that American intelligence is said to have reports that Sergei Surovikin, who also appeared in a video over the weekend urging Prigozhin to stand down, was aware of these plans in advance. And Surovikin, of course, was said to be close to Prigozhin. He was appointed commander of the overall war effort for a brief time in the autumn before being demoted and replaced by Gerasimov later on. But he was considered to be a competent commander. So, I think these divisions, these intrigues at the very top of Russia's high command are probably going to be the most significant consequence of this rebellion over the weekend. It's going to have reverberations for weeks and months to come, I think.
Yes, and I think perhaps, Shashank, you point to Putin's dilemma. Who does he point to? Who does he punish? How does he actually manage what does look like mutiny in the ranks?
That's right. He's got a trade-off here because, of course, the Wagner Group were Russia's most effective fighters inside Ukraine. My colleagues were speaking to Ukrainian soldiers in Bakhmut who said these guys were the real deal. They were good at advancing, not like those Russian regulars who were, basically coerced into fighting. And of course, he can choose to disband the organization and force them to sign contracts and defang them, as he seems to be trying to do. But he will potentially break up the cohesion of Wagner as a fighting force. But if he allows them to continue, if he allows Evgeny Prigozhin to maintain his power from exile in Belarus, I think that could pose a significant challenge to his power down the line. let's not forget, this is a force, the Wagner Group, that has just shot down 7 Russian planes and killed about 13 Russian pilots. That's a big deal. So if they go unpunished, what ideas does that give other potentially rebellious parts of the Russian force if this war continues to go badly for Putin? And that trade-off, I'm afraid, is one that's going to bite tightly and more tightly for Putin as time goes on.
Yes, because you can see just even the way, for example, Alexei Navalny's been treated, thrown into jail for 20 years for far less than Prigozhin. Putin does not really know how to manage Prigozhin. He potentially doesn't know how deep his support goes.
No, you know, what's interesting is there's a political scientist, an expert on Russia, Mark Galliotti, wrote an essay for my newspaper, The Economist, a few days ago, in which he argued, ultimately, this shows you how Putin is dithering. You know, and I think that's right. He dithered, for example, over the announcement of national mobilization last autumn. He only did it once his forces had been forced to withdraw from Kherson, and then he mobilized. Too little, too late. Once again, the feud with Prigozhin had been escalating for months. We could see this for months. You know, I think you and I have discussed some of these angry rants that Prigozhin has been launching against the defense minister and against the Russian leadership for several weeks. So this was a long time in the making, and Putin did not deal with it early. And even now, having announced that the Wagner Group were traitors, he has allowed Prigozhin to effectively go unpunished. What's the next thing he's going to dither on? And I suspect the next question is another round of mobilization. He needs to do it. He needs the men. He has no real offensive potential left. Whether or not Ukraine takes anything, I don't think Russia can go back on the offensive anytime soon. So when will he mobilize? But of course, he knows that if he does, he's going to have to do so in the teeth of a population that has now seen exposed publicly just how weak his leadership really is.
Yeah. And what do you think, how safe is Prigozhin in Belarus? Would he be, you know, being relaxed to think that he isn't going to be a target at some point?
Well, the joke, of course, is that Prigozhin has asked to be housed in a bungalow because you don't want to get on any high windows if you've got on the wrong side of the Russian leadership. Of course, Belarus is a subordinate partner of Russia. Let's not pretend otherwise. It's a little brother to Russia. The Belarusian KGB is probably working very closely with the Russian FSB. So if the Russian state wants to cause harm to Prigozhin, they won't have any trouble doing so in Belarus. He's going to be under their thumb. But I think the real question is, what happens to his fighting force? Will he take thousands of armed men with him? Because, let's not forget, Wagner was a creation of the Russian military and specifically of the GRU, the organization I mentioned earlier, Russian military intelligence. They provided most of the heavy weapons and ammunition. So unless they give him those things in Belarus, he's going to be sitting there stewing. And I suspect we haven't heard the last of him yet in terms of angry, subversive messages.
Indeed. Shashank, always appreciate your analysis. Thanks so much.
Thank you.